The chandeliers trembled with 1,000 trembling flames, each droplet of crystal holding captive a miniature sun, and beneath their glittering tyranny the ballroom of Lady Ashcombe's winter assembly swelled with music, perfume, and the gentle cruelty of civilized observation. Silk skirts murmured like restless tides across polished marble, gloved hands lifted fans not for warmth, but for concealment, and in the far corner, as though exiled by invisible decree, stood Miss Eliza Harcourt, perfectly still, as if motion itself might invite further scrutiny. She had dressed with deliberate modesty, ivory silk, high collar, sleeves of careful lace, yet the restraint only sharpened her isolation, for brilliance thrives upon contrast, and her quiet dignity appeared to provoke society's appetite for speculation. Whispers travelled with astonishing efficiency, gliding between brocade shoulders and feathered coiffures, altering shape as they moved, until rumor became almost indistinguishable from fact. It was said, though no one claimed to know by whom, that her father's correspondence with distant Eastern powers had drawn the disapproval of certain ministries. Others murmured that negotiations abroad had collapsed, leaving reputations brittle as winter glass. Some, with sweeter smiles, suggested merely that association with uncertainty was unfashionable. Each variation, however, arrived at the same conclusion: Miss Harcourt was no longer a safe partner for a quadrille. She felt their glances like the brush of cold air upon bare skin. A gentleman approached once, bowed with exquisite correctness, then seemed to recall something unfortunate and retreated, apology dissolving before it reached his lips. Her dance card remained stubbornly blank, its pale squares unclaimed territories. The orchestra struck a brighter tune, laughter rose, couples assembled in symmetrical delight. Eliza inclined her head, as though content to observe, yet her fingers tightened around the card until the paper bent, and she forced herself to loosen her grip lest the gesture betray her. Near the central column, a cluster of matrons conversed with deliberate softness. Their fans fluttered, forming a white-winged barrier through which their eyes peered with fascinated sympathy. "So unfortunate," one murmured. "Such a composed girl." Another sighed, "But diplomacy is a delicate thing, alliances falter." A third added, "One must be prudent. The season is too short for controversy." Their tone conveyed regret, yet the sparkle in their gaze revealed the peculiar pleasure of moral caution exercised publicly. Eliza lowered her eyes, studying the reflection of candlelight sliding across the floor. The marble seemed transformed into a silent lake, and she imagined stepping upon it, gliding away without ripple or trace. Instead she remained, breathing evenly, counting the measures of the music, determined that composure should be her last defense. Her mother's absence, illness had confined her to their modest townhouse, felt particularly acute. Without that familiar hand upon her sleeve, she must stand alone against judgment she scarcely understood. Across the room, Lord Nathaniel Ashford observed the proceedings with an attention disguised as indifference. He leaned lightly against the carved balustrade, one gloved hand resting upon the rail, his expression composed yet thoughtful. He had arrived late, and the subtle shift in atmosphere intrigued him more than the dancing. He watched the currents of avoidance, the careful redirection of gentlemen, the sympathy sharpened by distance. When his gaze settled upon Miss Harcourt, he noted the disciplined stillness of her posture, the faint tremor in her breath, and the dignity that rendered her solitude almost luminous. A companion at his side murmured, "You see her? The Harcourt girl. Best admired from afar." Ashford inclined his head, offering no reply. He had long distrusted the ease with which society condemned without trial. Yet he did not move immediately. Hesitation, like a shadow, lingered at the edge of intention. To cross the floor would invite speculation, perhaps censure. His family prized discretion above gallantry. Still, he remained watching, as if the decision required the settling of invisible scales. Another set concluded. Gentlemen escorted their partners back with courteous bows. Eliza glanced toward the doorway, contemplating retreat, but pride anchored her. To depart early would confirm defeat. She lifted her chin slightly, allowing the music's echo to steady her pulse. Somewhere nearby, a young debutante whispered, "Poor creature," not unkindly, yet the words struck like a bell announcing her fall. Ashford straightened. The pause between dances stretched, fragile as spun glass. He stepped away from the balustrade, his stride unhurried, yet purposeful. Conversation faltered in his wake, curiosity blooming like frost. Eliza sensed movement before she saw him. She turned, expecting another polite deflection. Instead she met his gaze, calm, assessing, neither pitying nor amused. He bowed with grave courtesy. "Miss Harcourt," he said, his voice low yet clear enough to travel, "may I claim the next dance, if it has not already been promised?" For an instant she forgot to breathe. The room seemed to contract, every whisper drawn inward. She glanced at her untouched card, then back at him, uncertain whether this was kindness or challenge. "My lord," she replied, "it would appear you ask for what no one else has dared." "Then I shall value it the more," he answered softly. His hand remained extended, patient, unwavering. Around them, silence rippled outward, anticipation mingling with disapproval. Eliza placed her gloved fingers upon his, feeling the warmth through layers of propriety. As they stepped toward the forming set, she sensed the tide of judgment shifting, not gentler, merely sharper. Yet within that scrutiny flickered something unexpected, the fragile possibility that disgrace, once shared, might transform into defiance. Morning arrived with a pale, diffident light that filtered through the narrow windows of the Harcourt townhouse, as though even the sun approached cautiously, unwilling to intrude upon a household touched by rumor. Eliza sat near the hearth, her hands folded in her lap, replaying the previous evening's dance in silent fragments, the measured cadence of Lord Ashford's steps, the steady warmth of his gloved palm, the silence that had followed them like a retinue of unspoken questions. She had slept little. Each recollection carried both comfort and unease, for kindness, when bestowed publicly, can stir a storm more dangerous than neglect. A discreet knock sounded. The maid entered with a small silver tray upon which rested a single envelope sealed in cream wax. No crest adorned it, yet the paper bore a faint scent of winter roses. Eliza accepted it, her pulse quickening. She broke the seal and unfolded a brief card. There were no flourishes, only a line written in a firm, elegant hand: "Peace, though fragile, is sometimes born from a solitary step." Beneath the words lay a pressed white rose, its petals delicate, almost translucent, as if preserved from a gentler season. Her mother, reclining upon a chaise, regarded the token with quiet concern. "Kindness invites speculation," she murmured. Eliza nodded, aware that the gift, however simple, would not remain private. Already she imagined servants whispering, messages conveyed through backstairs and carriage doors. She placed the rose upon the mantel, uncertain whether it signified hope or provocation. Yet she could not deny the warmth it awakened, a subtle defiance against the chill of judgment. By afternoon, she ventured to the public promenade, compelled by habit and an unwillingness to retreat entirely from society. The winter garden lay softened by thin clouds, gravel paths curved between clipped hedges, ladies drifted beneath parasols like pale blossoms carried by wind. Eliza sensed the change immediately. Conversations faltered as she passed. Some faces displayed cautious curiosity, others sharpened with renewed interest. News traveled swiftly. The rose, it seemed, had already blossomed into scandal. Lord Ashford approached from the opposite path, his dark coat cutting a composed line against the muted greenery. He bowed, neither overly familiar nor distant. "Miss Harcourt, may I accompany you?" The request, though politely phrased, carried a quiet resolve. She hesitated only briefly before accepting. Their steps fell into measured harmony. Around them, whispers thickened like gathering clouds. "You must know," she said softly, that your attention draws more notice than I merit. Notice, he replied, is often granted to the loudest folly. I prefer to lend it to quiet courage. She glanced at him, surprised by the steadiness of his tone. A group of young gentlemen passed, their conversation halting mid-laughter. One inclined his head stiffly, another avoided acknowledgement entirely. Eliza felt the weight of their scrutiny, yet she did not withdraw her arm. Instead she allowed herself to walk beside him, conscious that each step declared an allegiance neither had publicly defined. They paused near a marble bench. Ashford removed his glove and revealed a slender ribbon of white silk coiled around his wrist. He did not present it, merely allowed her to see it. Symbols, he said, are dangerous, yet they speak when words falter. His gaze lingered upon the distant roses. Yesterday's dance was interpreted as defiance. Today, I fear, even silence would be construed as strategy. Then why persist, she asked, her voice barely above the rustle of leaves. Because retreat would imply regret, and I possess none. The simplicity of his answer unsettled her. She felt gratitude rising, yet also dread. The world they inhabited valued equilibrium, bold gestures disturbed its delicate machinery. Already she imagined letters traveling between drawing rooms, opinions hardening. She withdrew her hand gently. You risk more than you acknowledge. Perhaps, he said, replacing his glove, but dignity is rarely preserved by caution alone. They resumed walking. At the garden's edge, a matron whispered audibly, he courts controversy. Another replied, or redemption. Eliza heard both interpretations and realized that her identity had become a canvas for others' conjectures. The white rose in her memory seemed suddenly heavier, as though its petals concealed consequences. When she returned home, another envelope awaited her, this one bearing a familiar crest. Her mother opened it, her expression tightening. It is from the Ashford household. Eliza's heart faltered. The letter, brief and impeccably courteous, conveyed that Lord Ashford's continued attentions were viewed with concern. His family, devoted to stability, feared that association with unsettled alliances might jeopardize long-standing relationships. They trusted, the note concluded, that prudence would guide future conduct. Eliza felt the room grow smaller. The rose upon the mantel appeared almost luminous, a fragile emblem challenged by colder authority. She understood then that his gesture had not been spontaneous alone, it had already provoked resistance. She imagined him reading similar admonitions, weighing loyalty against conviction. The realization deepened her admiration and sharpened her anxiety. Evening settled. The fire burned low. Eliza held the pressed rose between her fingers, studying its delicate veins. The day had transformed her solitude into a different trial, no longer ignored. She was now the axis of a quiet contest. She wondered whether she had the strength to endure its outcome. Outside, a carriage passed, wheels echoing along the street, and she thought of Ashford navigating his own corridors of expectation. A final note arrived, just before dusk, delivered without comment. Inside, a single line, storms clarify allegiance, I remain. She closed her eyes, sensing both reassurance and danger entwined. The ribbon, the rose, the whispers, all converged into a fragile promise. Yet as she placed the card beside the flower, she realized that every token binding them also tightened the scrutiny surrounding them, and somewhere beyond her window, decisions were being shaped that might soon demand more than courage alone. Rain began as a distant murmur, scarcely louder than a sigh against the windows of Ashcombe House, yet by the time Eliza stepped from the corridor into the library, the storm had gathered conviction, striking the glass in restless patterns that blurred the gardens beyond. The room glowed with restrained warmth, lamplight pooled upon polished mahogany, and rows of leather-bound volumes rose like silent witnesses along the walls. She paused near the hearth, drawing her shawl closer, aware that solitude here felt different from the isolation of ballrooms and promenades. This quiet invited honesty, and honesty frightened her more than whispers. She had accepted Lady Ashcombe's invitation reluctantly, sensing that society expected her either to withdraw entirely, or to reappear in triumph. Instead she occupied a middle ground, attending gatherings yet drifting to their margins. The library offered refuge, though even refuge seemed charged with anticipation. She moved toward a narrow table, her fingers trailing across the spine of a book, absorbing the faint scent of paper and firelight. The storm outside intensified, wind bending branches until their shadows trembled across the carpet like unsettled thoughts. Footsteps sounded behind her. She turned, already certain who had entered. Lord Ashford closed the door softly, as though unwilling to disturb the fragile calm. For a moment neither spoke. The quiet stretched, filled only by the rain and the measured rhythm of their breathing. He inclined his head, not formally, but with an intimacy that acknowledged shared awareness. "I hoped I might find you here," he said at last, his voice low. "It seems," she replied, "that I have become predictable in my search for quiet. Or perhaps I have learned where courage retreats when pressed too closely." She studied him, noticing the fatigue in his expression, the faint shadow beneath his eyes. The conflict she had imagined within his household appeared etched upon his features. "Your family's concerns must weigh heavily," she said. "They do," he admitted. "Yet they are not the only weight I carry." The admission altered the air between them. Eliza felt the urge to retreat into politeness, but the storm outside urged candor. "Then perhaps," she said gently, "we should speak plainly, before speculation speaks for us." He stepped nearer, stopping at a respectful distance. "Plainness is dangerous," he replied, "yet silence has grown more perilous still." His gaze shifted briefly to the rain-lashed windows. "You must understand that my attention, once casual, has become deliberate. I did not foresee the consequences, but I cannot pretend they are accidental." Her heart quickened. "And I cannot accept them without question. Each kindness you show me becomes a challenge to those who value stability above sentiment. I fear I draw you toward conflict you do not deserve." "Conflict," he said softly, "often reveals what complacency conceals. I have lived within expectations so long that I scarcely notice their confines. Your situation has forced me to examine them." She turned slightly, allowing the firelight to warm her hands. "Examination may lead to regret. Or to conviction." The word lingered, heavy with implication. Eliza felt the boundary between caution and confession thinning. "Conviction is admirable," she said, "but I would not have it purchased at the cost of your peace." "My peace," he answered, "has altered its definition." He paused, then added, "Yesterday I received a letter urging me to withdraw. It spoke of alliances, reputations, the delicacy of balance. Yet none of those considerations addressed what I have observed in you." "And what is that?" she asked, almost fearing his reply. "Composure under judgment. Grace without surrender. A refusal to allow rumor to dictate your worth. Such qualities demand acknowledgement." She lowered her eyes, moved by the sincerity in his tone. "You attribute strength where I feel only endurance." "Endurance," he said, "is strength in its quietest form." The rain thundered suddenly, as though punctuating his words. Eliza felt emotion rising, fragile yet undeniable. "If you continue," she whispered, "society will interpret your regard as more than admiration. Perhaps it already has. And do you wish that interpretation to be true?" The question hung between them like a suspended note. He hesitated, not from uncertainty, but from deliberation. "I wish," he said carefully, "to act with honesty. I find myself drawn to you, not from defiance alone, but from respect that has grown into something deeper." Her breath caught. The confession, restrained though it was, altered everything. She turned fully toward him. Then we stand upon dangerous ground. For if I accept such regard, I risk confirming the very scandal that isolates me. And if you refuse, I preserve your reputation at the expense of my sincerity. The simplicity of his response unsettled her. She felt the pull of longing, tempered by fear. You ask me to choose between gratitude and caution. I ask only that you acknowledge the possibility that caution may not be the noblest path. The firelight flickered, casting their shadows together upon the wall. Eliza sensed that the moment demanded courage equal to his. I cannot deny, she said slowly, that your presence steadies me. Yet I dread the consequences. I have already drawn enough attention to endanger you. Attention fades, he replied. Regret endures. Their eyes met, and for an instant the world beyond the library seemed distant. The storm softened, as though yielding to their quiet. He reached into his coat and withdrew a sealed note. I wrote this earlier, he said. I intended to leave it without explanation, but perhaps explanation is kinder. She accepted the paper, feeling its weight. What does it contain? A question, he answered. One I cannot ask aloud without presumption. Read it when you are alone, and only if you believe hope deserves consideration. Her fingers trembled slightly. You place a great deal within a small envelope. Sometimes, he said gently, the smallest tokens carry the greatest decisions. Footsteps approached in the corridor, faint yet unmistakable. He stepped back, restoring distance. I must not be discovered here too long, he added. Rumor thrives upon shadows. Eliza held the note close, aware that the conversation had shifted her resolve. You leave me with uncertainty. Uncertainty, he replied, is merely the threshold of choice. He bowed, then moved toward the door. As he opened it, the rain light framed his silhouette. Whatever you decide, he said softly, know that my respect remains unchanged. He departed, leaving the room suddenly larger and colder. Eliza remained by the hearth, the sealed note resting in her palm. The storm outside dwindled to a whisper, yet within her the conflict deepened. She traced the edge of the envelope, sensing that its contents might alter the fragile balance she had struggled to maintain. At last she lifted it toward the lamplight, hesitating, aware that once opened, the quiet equilibrium between caution and longing might dissolve forever. Dawn unfolded with hesitant tenderness, pale light seeping through the thinning mist that lingered across the Ashcombe gardens like a breath held too long. Eliza walked along the gravel path with measured steps, the sealed note now opened and folded within her gloved hand. She had read it twice before leaving her chamber, and its brevity had unsettled her more than any elaborate declaration. Meet me where the roses gather at first light. I would speak without witnesses, yet not without honesty. The simplicity of the invitation suggested urgency, and urgency, she knew, rarely arrived without consequence. The garden, softened by dew, appeared almost untouched by the social tempests that had shaped the preceding days. Roses bowed under droplets that glimmered like fragile promises, clipped hedges formed gentle corridors of green, distant statues emerged and vanished as the mist shifted. Eliza felt the quiet pressing upon her senses, encouraging reflection. She wondered whether she had chosen wisely in accepting the meeting. To appear here risked interpretation, to refuse might close the door he had carefully opened. She paused near an arch of pale blooms, her pulse quickening with anticipation. Lord Ashford emerged from the far path, his figure gradually clarified by the lifting haze. He wore a dark morning coat, the restraint of his attire contrasting with the tension in his expression. He bowed, but the gesture held less formality than before, as though their private conversation had stripped away unnecessary distance. You came, he said softly. I believed honesty deserved its moment, she replied. He glanced around, noting the absence of others, though distant movement near the terrace suggested early risers. The garden offers seclusion, yet not secrecy, he observed. I chose it deliberately. Whatever I say, I would not hide entirely. Her breath caught at the implication. Then speak, my lord, before courage falters. He stepped closer, careful to maintain propriety. Since our conversation in the library, I have considered the boundaries that confine us. My family's objections remain firm. They caution me that association with you may unsettle alliances cultivated over decades. Yet I find that their warnings clarify rather than diminish my intention. And that intention, she asked. To stand beside you openly, not as a fleeting advocate, but as one who acknowledges the regard that has grown between us. The words settled like dew upon fragile petals. Eliza felt both warmth and apprehension. Such openness invites judgment, she said. Society will demand explanations we cannot easily supply. Then let them demand, he answered. Peace between hearts, like peace between nations, begins when one refuses to retreat from conviction. She studied him, sensing the depth of his resolve. You speak as though the outcome rests solely upon courage. Yet I fear the consequences may wound more than ourselves. He reached into his coat and withdrew a narrow ribbon of white silk, its surface catching the faint sunlight. This, he said, is a symbol, nothing more, yet symbols sometimes guide perception. I would offer it as a token, not of triumph, but of willingness to endure scrutiny together. She hesitated, aware that acceptance would be visible even from a distance. You transform gestures into declarations. Only because silence has failed us. Her gaze drifted toward the terrace, where two figures paused, observing. The world, it seemed, had already begun to intrude. She returned her attention to him. If I accept, I confirm the very speculation that isolates me. And if you refuse, you confirm the fear that isolates me from honesty. The symmetry of his reasoning unsettled her. She realized that neutrality had vanished. She must choose between guarded solitude and shared uncertainty. You ask much, she whispered. I offer no less in return. The ribbon rested in his open palm. Eliza felt the morning air cool against her face, as though urging clarity. I have lived within caution, she said slowly, yet caution has not preserved my dignity. Perhaps courage, however uncertain, may restore it. She extended her hand. He placed the ribbon gently across her glove, his touch fleeting yet charged. The silk felt astonishingly light, yet its significance weighed upon her. Around them, the mist thinned further, revealing more of the garden, and, with it, the watching world. Whatever follows, he said quietly, know that I do not act from impulse alone. I intend to speak to my family, to assert that my judgment is my own. You may face resistance. I expect it. Their eyes met, understanding passing silently between them. Eliza felt a shift within herself, a readiness to endure consequences she had once feared. Then we stand together, she said, her voice steadier than she expected. Together, he echoed. Footsteps approached along the gravel. A senior matron, wrapped in a dark shawl, advanced with measured deliberation. Her gaze moved from the ribbon in Eliza's hand to Ashford's composed stance. The moment crystallized, poised between acceptance and censure. Eliza sensed that the fragile peace they had forged now awaited public judgment. She tightened her hold upon the silk, aware that the next words spoken would either legitimize their courage or cast it as folly. The matron halted before them, her expression unreadable, and Eliza felt the dawn's gentle promise harden into a decisive threshold. Evening returned the ballroom to brilliance, yet the light felt transformed, as though the chandeliers themselves remembered the unease that had once trembled beneath them. Music rose in confident swells, violins threading anticipation through the air, while polished floors reflected the assembled company in shimmering fragments. Eliza paused at the threshold, her hand resting lightly upon her mother's arm, the white silk ribbon concealed within her glove. The memory of Dawn's fragile courage steadied her, yet she felt the familiar pressure of scrutiny gathering, ready to test whether hope could survive public display. Conversation softened as she entered. Heads inclined, fans fluttered, and curiosity replaced the sharper edge of former disdain. Some faces displayed reluctant admiration, others maintained careful neutrality, unwilling to commit until the evening revealed its direction. Eliza sensed that her presence no longer invited outright avoidance, yet neither did it guarantee acceptance. She moved forward with measured composure, determined that dignity, once questioned, must now be affirmed deliberately. Across the room, Lord Ashford stood near the orchestra, his posture composed, though his gaze searched the entrance. When he saw her, the restraint in his expression gave way to quiet warmth. He approached without haste, each step deliberate, as though acknowledging the gravity of their shared choice. He bowed, not merely to her, but to her mother as well, offering respect that signaled sincerity rather than defiance. "Miss Harcourt," he said softly, "may I request the first dance?" The question, though simple, carried the weight of declaration. Eliza felt the room draw closer, every whisper poised to interpret her response. She inclined her head. "I believe, my lord, that I should accept, for hesitation has never favored me." He extended his hand, and she placed hers within it, aware that their union at the center of the floor would transform private resolve into visible alliance. The orchestra began, the melody measured and dignified. As they moved together, she felt the steady assurance of his guidance, the subtle confidence in his steps. Around them, society watched, not with the earlier hunger for scandal, but with a more contemplative attention, as though reconsidering assumptions. "You appear calm," he murmured. "I am determined," she replied. "Calmness may follow." He smiled faintly. "Determination has already altered the evening." They turned gracefully, their reflections gliding beneath the chandelier's glow. Eliza sensed the shift. No longer isolated, she occupied the center with quiet authority. Yet the tension had not vanished. It lingered in the stillness of observers, in the unspoken question of whether courage would be rewarded or punished. She felt the ribbon pressing lightly against her palm, a reminder of Dawn's promise. As the dance continued, Ashford spoke again, his voice low. "I have spoken with my family. They remain cautious, yet they respect firmness when it is offered without arrogance." "And you offered it?" she asked. "I did. I told them that respect cannot flourish where judgment precedes knowledge." She felt gratitude rise. "You have risked much." "I have gained clarity," he answered. They completed another turn. A senior matriarch, the same who had approached them in the garden, watched from nearby, her expression softened but still measured. Eliza realized that acceptance would depend upon more than their own resolve. Society required endorsement from those who shaped its tone. The music swelled, and she drew breath, sensing that the climax approached. When the dance ended, Ashford did not release her immediately. Instead, he guided her toward the center, where the matriarch stood. Conversation quieted further, anticipation sharpening. The older woman regarded them both, her gaze moving from Ashford's composed confidence to Eliza's steady poise. "You have chosen visibility," the matriarch said, her voice clear enough to carry. "We have chosen honesty," Ashford replied. The matriarch studied Eliza. "Miss Harcourt, you have borne rumor with commendable restraint. Society, I believe, owes you reconsideration." She turned slightly, addressing those nearby. "We must remember that dignity under scrutiny is often the truest measure of character." A murmur of agreement spread, tentative yet genuine. Eliza felt relief mingled with astonishment. The matriarch inclined her head, signaling acceptance not as concession, but as acknowledgement. With that gesture, resistance softened, conversations resumed with warmer tones, smiles replaced guarded curiosity. Ashford turned to Eliza. "It appears peace has found its moment." "Peace," she replied, "yet fragile, like the ribbon I carry." "Fragility," he said, "does not diminish value." He requested another dance, and she accepted. This time the movement felt lighter, the tension eased by recognition. As they circled the floor, she allowed herself a quiet smile. The humiliation that had once defined this room now seemed distant, replaced by the memory of courage shared. "Do you regret any part of this?" he asked. "Only that fear delayed it," she answered. He drew slightly closer, careful yet sincere. "Then allow me one further confession. If the world must debate our union, let it do so. I have already entrusted my heart to your keeping." Her breath caught, the words resonating deeply. "And I," she said, "have discovered that dignity grows when shared." The final notes faded, and applause followed, gentle but sincere. They paused beneath the chandeliers, their light no longer harsh but warm. Eliza felt the transformation complete. Shame had yielded to respect, uncertainty to quiet confidence. Yet as they moved toward the edge of the floor, she sensed that the journey beyond society's approval had only begun. A carriage waited outside, its lamps glowing through the mist. Ashford offered his arm, and she accepted. As they stepped into the night, the ballroom's brilliance receded behind them, replaced by softer shadows. The air carried a hint of rain, echoing earlier trials. She glanced at him, aware that peace, once achieved, required continued courage. He met her gaze. "Tomorrow," he said, "we shall define what this peace becomes." She nodded, feeling anticipation stir anew. The carriage door closed, wheels turning slowly, and as they departed, the chandelier's distant glow faded, leaving them poised between resolution and the promise of a future still unfolding.